Barbara, I'll start with you and these comments, these rare comments, I should say, public rare comments from Judge Reggie Walton. First, just give us some context for what it means for a sitting federal judge to speak out like this in this manner. And what do you think of what he had to say about what him, his family, and other judges are experiencing, all because of the cases they are taking?
Well, judges traditionally think of their comments as coming only through their orders. They are typically pretty loath to make public comments, particularly about any particular case, because they don't want to suggest anything other than impartiality. And so I think it is quite extraordinary for the judge to be speaking out here. But I think that only judges know what their experiences are like and the kinds of threats that they're getting and how new this phenomenon really is. You know, we can look at some examples of judges who were on the receiving end of threats to their lives. There was a judge in New Jersey whose son was killed with bullets meant for her. There was a judge in Chicago whose husband and mother were killed by someone looking for her. So these threats can be very dangerous.
Hey friends, welcome. Dr. John here. So let's get started. Trump has gone silent. Not quiet, not strategic, mute. 0 posts on Truth Social for over 2 hours. From a man who treats his feed like a direct line to his own nervous system, who has never once in his political life chosen silence over noise.
I think the fact that the judge is choosing to speak out, keep in mind, this is a judge appointed by Republican presidents, both Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. And so for him to be going out there, this is not, a pro-Republican, pro-Democrat type of a comment. This is a comment about the state of our judiciary and the rule of law.
And speaking of that, Eugene, Donald Trump has publicly attacked so many people over the last 9 years. It's stuff we cover on a regular basis. He hasn't faced any real consequences for those verbal attacks.
This isn't a calculated pause. This is what it looks like when someone who has spent an entire lifetime escaping consequences suddenly realizes the escape routes are gone. What triggered this unprecedented silence was not a bad poll or a negative news cycle or some cable news panel that hurt his feelings. It was a federal judge.
And that's obviously been devastating to the state of political discourse in this country because it's really set new parameters, created a new culture, if you will, where this seems to be acceptable for some people in Trump's circle. What does it say about our justice system that this judge is now publicly raising this alarm?
Well, it says that this is an issue that is worthy of attention from the highest levels in our country. There's been a report that came out this week from Reuters that said since 2020, attacks on federal judges have more than doubled. Since 2015, the year that former President Donald Trump launched his first presidential campaign, that number has more than tripled. And you've seen Republicans in the judicial system come out and say they believe it is because, in part, the norms that have now been set.
Sitting in an actual courtroom, presiding over an actual case with actual evidence being presented, looking directly at the sitting president of the United States through a video feed and telling him that he is facing life imprisonment. Life, not a fine, not a settlement, not some negotiated plea deal that gets brushed under the rug. Life without parole in federal prison.
By Donald Trump. We haven't seen many Republicans on Capitol Hill, if any, come out and say that this is something that needs to stop. And if it does not, we could expect it to continue. And there could be even worse consequences than some of those we've already seen, which have been quite severe in some cases.
Barbara, as you pointed out, Judge Walton was appointed by Republican presidents. The Washington Post points out that other Republican appointed judges have also spoken out about this. It's clearly not a Democratic or Republican issue at this moment, no matter what Donald Trump says or what he tries to portray it as. But what can be done? And is the fact that he has been given so much leeway, where he has not been held to account just for the rhetoric of what he has said about judges, clerks of the court, daughters of judges, family members of judges, is that in of itself unprecedented and dangerous that he is not held to account?
The kind of sentence from which there is no escape and no appeal that matters and no pardon that can undo the fundamental reality that your life as you have known it is over forever. The scene that produced this moment was so dramatic that if you wrote it into a political thriller, critics would dismiss it as too extreme and too unrealistic for audiences to accept. A federal courthouse in the late afternoon. A witness in the Epstein probe case on the stand.
Yeah, historically, you didn't have to tell tell people not to make death threats about judges and their family members, or not to, say things that were likely to inflame the public such that they would become the subject of these kinds of threats. And so we've really crossed over into a new era. And Donald Trump is going to look for any loophole he can find in these gag orders. The one that was issued by Judge Merchan did not include the judge's family. And so that's who Donald Trump goes after. Who's left? Who's outside the scope? Now, the judge can amend that order, and I suspect he will, to include the judge's family to make the next go-round prohibited. But, Donald Trump will then look for somebody else.
The questioning has been intense for hours, prosecutors pressing on details about payments and communications and who gave what orders to whom. The cross-examination has been brutal. The pressure has been building. And then something inside this witness,
because the judges have been careful to exclude themselves and the prosecutors from these gag orders to allow Donald Trump to criticize the prosecution and the judiciary in these cases. I do think, though, that the way to at least curtail some of this is through vigorous prosecution. You may recall that when Merrick Garland was asking U.S. attorneys around the country to gather their law enforcement partners and be sure to have a program in place to prosecute people who are engaging in threats at school board meetings, with health officials, with election board officials. And when he testified before Congress, members of the Senate cracked down on him as suggesting that he was violating the First Amendment rights of parents and other people in communities.
Just shatters. They start screaming, not controlled testimony, not careful answers parsed by lawyers, screaming, wailing it out for everyone in that courtroom to hear. Trump ordered it. Those words come out of their mouth. Trump ordered it, and they collapse. They physically break down on the stand.
Threats are not protected by the First Amendment. And so we have to make that very clear here, that this is a serious crime and it threatens to affect the rule of law in this country. And so those people who give any sort of serious discussion to this as if prosecuting threats is in any way violative of the First Amendment is absolutely absurd and is just enabling those who communicate these threats.
John, let's bring you into this conversation. Two big stories that are connected this week. The bond Trump has to pay in the fraud case reduced to $175 million, and stock for his social media platform, Truth Social, going public. The value of that public stock in the billions, even though the company doesn't really make any money. And all of this against the backdrop of a clock still ticking for Trump to post his bond. Where do you see all of this heading?
Falling unconscious or nearly unconscious right there in front of the judge and the jury and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys and everyone watching. Judge Sullivan has been on the bench long enough to have seen almost everything the criminal justice system can produce.
Now, let me just go back for 1 second, Eamon, if you don't mind. I just want to say, sure, we don't have to theorize about what the effect of Donald Trump's words are when he goes and attacks people. We have seen it. He has seen it himself. He told his supporters that Mike Pence was the problem with the 2020 election, and they went to the Capitol and chanted that they wanted to hang him. They sought out Mike Pence. They sought out lawmakers. So this is not an abstraction. It's not something that we have to wonder about. It's not something Donald Trump can pretend he doesn't understand, because the best argument for him on January 6th is he said something that people took him, more seriously than he wanted. So just wanted to get that out of the way. As far as what's going on with Trump in terms of the reduction of bond and what's going on with his Truth Social stock, it's a very good monetary week for Donald Trump. It could have been a very bad one.
He has presided over cases that ranged from mundane to historic, but watching a witness completely disintegrate in his courtroom while screaming accusations at the President of the United States is something that would give even the most experienced jurist pause. Sullivan does not pause. He has had enough. He has been watching this administration melt down for weeks. He has seen the press secretary collapse in the White House. He has seen cabinet members demanding each other's resignations.
And it looks like he's going to be significantly wealthier at the end of this than we might have expected heading into this week.
Eugene, according to the Washington Post, some of the GOP billionaire donors who backed away from Trump after January 6 are suddenly rediscovering their support for him. Make that make sense for us. What should voters be taking away from it? Why are they suddenly pivoting to a guy that many distanced themselves for what he did on January the 6th to suddenly embracing him in the span of less than 4 years?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's two words. It's tax cuts. President Trump, when he was in the White House, put forward legislation that made things very lucrative for many of these billionaires. And President Biden has pledged to advance legislation and laws that could see these individuals experience a decrease in their wealth. And so despite being very upset with former President Trump,
he has heard the whispers about the 25th Amendment and the private conversations among Republican senators about whether they finally have the votes to remove this president from office. And now a witness in his own courtroom has just screamed that Trump personally ordered the interference with federal proceedings.
After January 6th, or at least vocalizing that, you've seen a number of billionaires attend fundraisers and planning to attend the one that the Trump campaign is suggesting next week will bring in $33 million with the hope that if Trump gets to the White House, that they can remain the billionaires that they currently are and hopefully make even more money, something that is at risk if Biden is to win the election.
John, for the most part, though, Trump has been able to choose when he wants to be in court. And once his hush money trial starts April 15th, he'll actually have to be in court a lot. President Biden, the Democrats are already massively outraising Trump. They're definitely outraising the GOP. What is this campaign going to look like when this trial starts in a couple of weeks' time?
Sullivan stops everything. He halts the proceedings immediately, he calls a recess, and then he does something that is almost entirely without precedent in American legal history. He addresses the president directly. Trump is not in the courtroom. He is watching remotely from somewhere in the White House, probably the residence, maybe the West Wing, staring at a monitor while his entire legal defense collapses in real time.
Yeah, when you talk to senior Republican officials, senior campaign officials for Trump, they say that they don't need to raise as much money as Joe Biden in order to win this election. And I guess that's good news for them because they are not going to raise as much money as Joe Biden, or at least, if things continue along their current trajectory. What this campaign looks like once his trial starts is you're going to see a whole lot of Donald Trump in court, and then you're going to see some Donald Trump on the campaign trail. We're going to see him on the campaign trail on the weekends. We may see one day a week or so of court not in session where he gets out and does some events. We're going to see surrogates out there for him in terms of family members, other people who are closely identified with his brand. And he's going to make the argument that the trial is, in fact, impeding his ability to campaign. Obviously, those are going to have less sympathy for that than others. But I think we'll see Trump on the campaign trail. In some ways, it benefits him because he doesn't actually like to be out there all that much. And now he has a ready-made excuse.
Barbara, I'll close this out with the theme that we were opening it up with, and that is the outlook for Trump's appeal of the Fani Willis situation in Georgia, perhaps the trial that most were looking forward to as one to hold Trump accountable for January the 6th in some fashion, now sliding by the day. But is this appeal likely to go anywhere?
Sullivan looks into that camera and he speaks to the president as though Trump were just another defendant who needs to understand the stakes. Mr. President, interference means life without parole. Those are the exact words the judge used, not allegedly, not reportedly. Those are the words that echoed through that courtroom and then through every newsroom and every political office in Washington as the story exploded across the media landscape. A federal judge in open court in front of prosecutors and defense attorneys and court reporters and everyone else who was present just warned the sitting president of the United States that if the evidence proves he orchestrated witness tampering, he will spend the rest of his life in federal prison. You cannot fully process what that means when you first hear it. This is not some back-channel warning delivered through lawyers to other lawyers in a private conference room. This is not some anonymous leak to a newspaper suggesting that prosecutors are considering certain charges. This is a federal judge on the record in open court making a direct statement about the legal consequences that await the president if the evidence holds up. And the statute the judge cited is not some obscure regulatory provision that carries 6 months of probation. It is 18 U.S.C. Section 1512, the federal witness tampering statute. This law has real teeth. If you interfere with a witness in a federal proceeding, you can face up to 20 years in prison. But if there is broader obstruction, if there is coordinated interference across multiple witnesses, if you are the architect of the entire scheme, if you are the one giving the orders from the top, then the sentence can become life imprisonment. That is what the judge told Trump is on the table. That is the stakes. And Trump's response to this existential threat was not to fight. It was not to rage. It was not to post 50 times on Truth Social about witch hunts and deep state conspiracies and how everything is so unfair. His response was complete and total silence. For 2 hours and 20 minutes, the President of the United States vanished from public view. No posts, no statements. No surrogates dispatched to the cameras to spin the story. Nothing. His aides began leaking to the media, and the word they used was catatonic. That is not a word that gets deployed casually. That is not spin. That is a description of someone who is shut down mentally and emotionally, because the reality of their situation has finally penetrated whatever psychological defenses they have spent decades constructing. When Trump goes silent like this, it means something genuinely terrifying has happened. This is a man who responds to bad headlines within minutes. A negative story breaks, and he is online calling it fake news before the commercial break ends. A court decision goes against him, and he is ranting about corrupt judges while the ink is still wet on the order. He cannot help himself. The impulse to defend, to attack, to reframe, to lie, to do whatever is necessary to regain control of the narrative is so deeply embedded in his psychology that it operates faster than conscious thought. For that impulse to be overridden, for the machinery of self-defense to simply shut down for over 2 hours, the threat must be of an entirely different order than anything he has faced before. What his lawyers are certainly telling him during this silence is that anything he says right now will be used against him in court. Every post, every statement, every word that comes out of his mouth or his thumbs becomes evidence that prosecutors can introduce at trial. If he attacks the witness, that becomes evidence of witness intimidation. If he attacks the judge, that becomes evidence of consciousness of guilt. If he denies everything, that becomes a statement that can be compared against documents and testimony and shown to be false. His lawyers are almost certainly screaming at him to stay quiet, to say nothing, to let them handle the legal response while he remains silent. And the fact that he is actually listening to them, that he has actually stopped posting for over 2 hours, tells you that even Trump understands this situation is different from everything that came before. The evidence that prosecutors presented in that courtroom ties together multiple threads that have been developing for weeks. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, ordered certain materials to be redacted and kept hidden from the public record. The witness who broke down on the stand is now saying that those exact materials, the documents Bondi ordered covered up, are the proof that Trump personally directed the witness tampering. The connection is direct and damning. The cover-up was designed to conceal the very crime that the witness has now exposed. And Patel, who testified under oath about some of these events, is now facing accusations from prosecutors that he lied during his testimony. They say they have evidence that contradicts his statements. They say his account does not match the facts established by documents and other witnesses. They are reportedly fast-tracking contempt charges against him. One person testifies, another person's testimony contradicts it, a third person admits to ordering the redactions that were meant to hide the evidence, and the entire structure collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. The broader context of this moment makes it even more catastrophic for Trump. His administration has been coming apart for weeks in ways that are visible to anyone paying attention. Caroline Leavitt, his press secretary, literally collapsed in the White House during this period of chaos. Cabinet members have been demanding each other's resignations in meetings that have devolved into shouting matches. The conversations about invoking the 25th Amendment, once whispered in the most private settings, have moved into open discussion among people with the authority to act on them. Republican senators, the last line of defense that has protected Trump through 2 impeachments and countless scandals, are having private conversations about whether they finally have the votes to remove him from office. The political and legal crises are not running on separate tracks. They are feeding each other, each one making the other worse, each one accelerating the timeline toward whatever conclusion awaits. The silence from Trump is the most revealing response he could have given. If this were a normal scandal, if this were something he thought he could survive, he would be posting. He would be attacking the witness and the judge and the prosecutors and anyone else he could think of. He would be calling it a hoax and a witch hunt and an attack by the deep state. That is what he does when he still believes there is a path to victory. His silence means he has seen the evidence and heard the judge and talked talked to his lawyers, and concluded that there is no path to victory. His silence means he is confronting the genuine possibility that he will die in federal prison. His silence means the man who has wriggled out of every consequence his entire life has finally run out of escape routes. The witness breakdown itself deserves more attention than it has received in the initial flood of coverage. When a witness collapses and screams in open court, judges do not simply move on and pretend it did not happen. A physical and emotional collapse of that magnitude tells the court something important about the pressure that has been applied to that witness. It suggests genuine trauma. It suggests that whatever they are testifying about is not some abstract legal dispute, but something that has caused real psychological damage. Judges take that seriously. They investigate it. They consider what it means for the credibility of the testimony and the severity of the underlying conduct. Sullivan has been watching this case develop for long enough to understand that the witness's breakdown was not an isolated moment of stress, but a manifestation of something much larger. The timeline of how this day unfolded matters because it demonstrates how quickly a presidency can unravel when multiple crises converge. The morning started with the usual chaos that has become the background noise of this administration. Cabinet members whispering in corridors about the 25th Amendment. Republican senators meeting behind closed doors to count votes. West Wing staffers panicking about what comes next. Then the witness took the stand and everything accelerated. The questioning about payments and communications and who gave orders. The cross-examination that pushed harder and harder. The moment when something inside the witness finally broke. The scream that filled the courtroom, the collapse, Sullivan's decision to halt everything and address the president directly, the threat of life imprisonment delivered in open court, and then the silence from the White House that stretched on for over 2 hours while aides leaked word that the president was catatonic. The statute the judge cited is not some vague provision that could mean anything. Section 1512 of Title 18 is the federal witness tampering law, and it is one of the most serious statutes in the criminal code. It exists because the justice system cannot function if witnesses can be intimidated or silenced or manipulated. Congress has attached severe penalties to violations precisely because witness tampering strikes at the heart of the rule of law itself. The basic provision carries up to 20 years in federal prison. But when the tampering is part of a broader scheme, when multiple witnesses are involved, when the defendant is the architect of the entire conspiracy rather than just a participant, the exposure can become life imprisonment. Sullivan was not speculating or exaggerating. He was stating what the law provides and what the evidence in his courtroom appears to support. The fact that Trump's aides are using the word catatonic to describe his condition is almost as significant as the silence itself. Aides do not leak that word without a reason. They are signaling something to the world about the president's mental state. They are preparing the public for the possibility that he may not be capable of continuing to function in office. They are creating a record that will be used in future discussions about the 25th Amendment and succession and whether the presidency can continue under these circumstances. Catatonic is not a word that describes someone who is angry or frustrated or even despondent. It describes someone who is shut down, who is not responding, who is disconnected from the reality around them. That is a medical and psychological condition, not a political posture. The lawyers surrounding Trump are almost certainly preparing for every possible scenario right now. They are drafting legal briefs to respond to whatever charges may come. They are preparing contingency plans for a succession crisis if Trump is removed or resigns. They are advising everyone in the administration about their own potential criminal exposure and what they need to do to protect themselves. And they are telling Trump over and over again to stay silent, to say nothing, to let them handle the legal response while he remains in whatever state of shock or shutdown has consumed him. The connection between Bondi's redactions and the witness testimony is particularly devastating because it creates a direct link between the cover-up and the crime. Bondi ordered certain materials to be kept secret. The witness is now saying those materials are the evidence that proves Trump ordered the interference. The redactions were not some unrelated bureaucratic decision. They were specifically targeted at the documents that would expose what Trump allegedly did. And the witness who has now broken down on the stand is the person who can prove that connection. Patel's testimony adds another layer to the catastrophe. He testified under oath about certain events related to this investigation. investigation. Prosecutors are now saying his testimony was false. They have evidence that contradicts his statements. They are moving toward contempt charges. When multiple people in an administration are facing legal consequences for covering up the same underlying conduct, the pressure on each of them to cooperate with prosecutors becomes overwhelming. Someone will flip. Someone will decide that saving themselves is more important than protecting the president. That is how these cases always unravel. Sullivan has been watching this entire drama play out over weeks and months. He has seen the press secretary collapse and cabinet members resign and senators discuss removal. He has read the news reports and reviewed the evidence presented in his courtroom. And when the witness finally broke down and screamed Trump's name, Sullivan decided that the moment required something unprecedented. He decided to make absolutely clear to everyone involved what the stakes actually are. This is not some political dispute that can be resolved through negotiation. This is not some legal gray area where clever lawyers can find loopholes. This is witness tampering in a federal proceeding. The evidence appears to support the charge, and the penalty upon conviction is life in federal prison. The silence from Trump confirms that he understands this in a way he has never understood any previous threat. He has faced impeachment twice and survived. He has faced criminal investigations and civil lawsuits and financial penalties and political scandals that would have destroyed anyone else. Through all of it, he kept posting, he kept attacking, he kept spinning and lying and reframing and doing whatever was necessary to maintain the narrative that he was the victim and his enemies were corrupt. That machinery has now stopped. The silence that has replaced it is the sound of a man confronting the genuine possibility that his life as a free man is over. The aides who are leaking to the media are not just sharing gossip. They are positioning themselves for what comes next. They are creating distance between themselves and the president. They are establishing a public record that they recognize the severity of the situation and tried to respond appropriately. They are preparing for the investigations that will follow. The questions from prosecutors and congressional committees and journalists about what they knew and when they knew it and what they did about it. The word catatonic serves their interests as well as describing Trump's condition. It says they were dealing with a president who had become non-functional, that whatever decisions they made during this period were made in the context of an unprecedented psychological collapse at the highest level of government. The Republican senators who have been privately discussing removal are now facing a decision that cannot be delayed much longer. If the president is catatonic, if he is shut down in response to a federal judge threatening him with life imprisonment, if his own aides are leaking that he is non-functional, then the question of whether he can continue to serve is no longer theoretical. The 25th Amendment exists precisely for situations where the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. A president who has gone silent for hours after receiving the worst legal news of his life, who is described by his own staff as catatonic, who is facing life in prison for crimes allegedly committed while in office, may well meet that standard. The convergence of these crises creates a moment unlike anything in American history. A president facing life imprisonment, a witness breaking down and screaming his name in open court, a cabinet in chaos, a party abandoning him, an administration leaking that he has become catatonic, and through it all, the silence from the man at the center of the storm, the posts that never came, the rants that never materialized, the defenses that were never mounted, the silence that tells you everything you need to know about how serious this has become.